People always ask me if there was a single moment my marriage fell apart. I used to say no, that marriages don't collapse in a day. They crack a little at a time until one day the whole thing caves in. But I was wrong. For us, it happened on one rainy Thursday night in Chicago. One missed phone call. One terrible assumption. One decision that neither of us could ever take back. My name is Ethan Walker, and for almost 12 years, I believed I had built the kind of marriage people envied. I was 36 when everything unraveled. My wife, Claire, was the smartest person I'd ever met. She had earned every promotion through grit, late nights, and relentless determination. She wasn't born into money. Neither of us was. We met while attending a community fundraiser during our college years, where she accidentally spilled coffee across my notes. "I swear I never do things like this," she'd said, frantically grabbing napkins. I smiled. "Good. Because I was starting to think you were trying to get my attention." She laughed so hard that people turned to stare. That laugh became my favorite sound in the world. We built everything together. Our first apartment had stained carpets, leaky windows, and a heater that only worked when you kicked it twice. We couldn't afford expensive dates, so we'd buy frozen pizza, sit on the floor, and dream about where we'd be in 10 years. Claire wanted to become a senior executive in a national marketing firm. I wanted to design affordable housing projects that actually help struggling families. Different dreams. Same future. At least, that's what I believed. Years passed. Claire climbed the corporate ladder faster than anyone expected. Every promotion came with longer hours, bigger responsibilities, and higher expectations. I was proud of her, painfully proud. When coworkers joked that I was Mr. Claire Walker, I'd laugh because her success never threatened me. If anything, it made me admire her more. Still, something began changing. Not all at once. Little things. She stopped asking about my day. Dinner conversations became work meetings. Weekend hikes disappeared. Vacations became conferences. Whenever I suggested slowing down, she'd squeeze my hand. "Just one more year," she'd promise. "Everything we're doing now is for our future." I believed her, because that's what husbands do. About 6 months before the divorce, Claire was nominated for Executive Vice President, the youngest in company history. It was huge. The promotion would double her salary. She worked herself nearly to exhaustion preparing for it. Some nights, I'd wake at 2 in the morning and find her surrounded by spreadsheets in the dining room. I'd bring her coffee, rub her shoulders, tell her she was brilliant. She'd smile without looking away from her laptop. "I couldn't do this without you." Those words kept me going. Then came the week that changed everything. My younger sister, Emma, called me late Monday night. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Our dad collapsed," she managed to say. "He had a stroke." My stomach dropped. Dad lived almost 3 hours away. The doctors weren't sure if he'd recover. I drove there before sunrise. Claire couldn't come. She had rehearsals for the biggest presentation of her career. She hugged me tightly before I left. "Call me every hour." "I will." For 3 straight days, I drove back and forth between the hospital and home, barely sleeping. Dad slowly stabilized. It looked like he'd survive. By Thursday afternoon, Claire texted me. "Tonight, 7 o'clock, ballroom at the Hilton. Don't be late." She'd sent me that reminder at least 6 times that week. I promised her I'd be there. Nothing could have kept me away. At 6:15 that evening, I was already driving toward downtown Chicago when my phone rang. "Emma." Her voice shook. Dad stopped breathing. I made a U-turn so fast the tires screamed. When I reached the emergency room, doctors were rushing him inside. Emma collapsed into my arms. I thought he died. For the next 2 hours, nobody told us anything. No updates. No answers. Just silence. I looked at my phone. 32 missed calls. 27 text messages. Almost all from Claire. "Where are you? Everyone is asking about you. Please tell me you're parking." Then, "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone." 5 minutes later, "Don't bother coming anymore." My hands trembled. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Finally, another message appeared. Just 6 words. We're done pretending this marriage works. I stared at the screen while machines beeped behind the emergency room doors. At that exact moment, the surgeon walked toward us. His face told me everything before he spoke. Dylan Walker made it through surgery. He paused. But the next 24 hours will determine whether he lives. I closed my eyes in relief. Then I looked back at my phone. Another message from Claire. One I would never forget. Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce. I thought it was written in anger. I believed she'd calm down once I explained. I had no idea. She had already made up her mind. The next morning, I drove home wearing the same wrinkled clothes I'd had on for nearly 24 hours. My phone battery had died sometime after midnight, and I hadn't even noticed. My mind was consumed by one thing. Dad was alive, but barely. As I pulled into the driveway, Claire's SUV was already gone. Inside the house, it felt strangely empty. Half the pictures were missing from the walls. Her favorite coffee mug was gone from the cabinet. The closet door stood open, revealing only my clothes hanging on one side. Then I saw the envelope on the kitchen island. My name was written neatly across the front in Claire's handwriting. Inside were divorce papers. There was also a handwritten note. Ethan, I waited years believing things would eventually change. Last night proved that no matter how important something is to me, I will always come second. I can't spend the rest of my life begging my own husband to show up for me. I deserve someone who chooses me first. I'm sorry it ended this way. Claire. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I couldn't believe she truly believed those words. I called her immediately. Straight to voicemail. Again, nothing. Around noon, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law Linda. Ethan, she said coldly, don't make this harder than it already is. I just need 5 minutes to explain. You embarrassed my daughter in front of 200 executives. I was at the hospital. There was silence. Then she sighed. That's the excuse you're going with. Excuse. That single word hit harder than I expected. My father almost died. So did Claire's career. Before I could answer, she hung up. Over the next few days, I tried everything. Flowers, letters, emails, even asking mutual friends if Claire would meet me for coffee. Every answer was the same. No. Apparently, everyone had already heard the story. According to them, I had abandoned my wife on the biggest night of her life. No one knew where I'd actually been. No one asked. Rumors always travel faster than truth. The divorce process moved unbelievably fast. Claire hired one of the best attorneys in Chicago. She wanted a clean break. No drama. No delays. When we finally sat across from each other during mediation, it was the first time I'd seen her since that night. She looked exhausted, older somehow, but her eyes never met mine. The mediator cleared his throat. Mrs. Walker has agreed to an equal division of assets. I barely listened. I looked at Claire. Can we talk? No. Just 5 minutes. We're talking now. Not about lawyers. She folded her hands. There's nothing left to say. I reached into my briefcase. I brought something. Her attorney immediately leaned forward. My client isn't required. Claire held up a hand. I slid a folded hospital wristband across the table. It still had my name on it. Admission time. Emergency contact. Everything. I wasn't ignoring you, I said quietly. I was here. For the first time, she looked directly at it. Then at me. Her expression softened for less than a second. I thought maybe she'd finally understand. Instead, she pushed it back. You should have called. My phone died. You could have borrowed one. I never left the emergency room. You always have an explanation. The words knocked the air from my lungs. Not because they were cruel. Because I realized she'd already decided who I was. No amount of evidence could compete with the story she'd built in her mind. She stood. I'm done. And just like that, my marriage officially ended. The weeks afterward were brutal. Our mutual friends quietly disappeared. Dinner invitations stopped. Couples we'd vacationed with suddenly became too busy. One afternoon, I walked into my favorite neighborhood cafe. A friend named Greg was sitting by the window. We'd known each other for almost 15 years. When he saw me, he awkwardly gathered his laptop. "I've got to run. You just got here." "Yeah." He wouldn't even look at me. Later I learned why. Claire's version of the story had spread through nearly everyone we knew. I was the selfish husband who couldn't be bothered to attend the most important night of his wife's career. The truth stayed inside a hospital. Only Emma, my father, and I knew it. Dad eventually recovered enough to return home. His speech was slower. Walking required a cane. One afternoon, while helping him onto his porch swing, he asked quietly, "Did Claire ever forgive you?" I smiled without meaning to. "There wasn't anything to forgive." He lowered his head. "I ruined your marriage." "No. You came because of me. I came because you're my father." Tears filled his eyes. I wish she'd understood. So do I. Meanwhile, Claire's career exploded. She became executive vice president. Her picture appeared in business magazines. LinkedIn was flooded with congratulations. Friends sent me screenshots. I never opened them. There wasn't any point. She had the future she'd always wanted. I truly hoped it made her happy. 2 years passed. Life slowly became quieter. I left the architecture firm where I'd spent a decade and accepted a position with a nonprofit that designed affordable housing for veterans and struggling families. The pay wasn't glamorous, but every project meant something. For the first time in years, I woke up excited to go to work. I also met people who didn't know me as Claire's ex-husband. They knew me simply as Ethan. And somehow, that felt like getting a piece of myself back. One evening, our executive director handed me a folder. "We're trusting you with our biggest project yet." Inside were plans for rebuilding an abandoned neighborhood. It would take years. It would also change thousands of lives. I looked at the blueprints. Then I smiled. For the first time since my divorce, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I could still build. I had no idea that across the city, Claire's perfect new life was beginning to crack. The promotion she'd sacrificed everything for came with endless politics. Her wealthy executives weren't friends. They were competitors. The glamorous dinners became lonely hotel rooms. The praise became impossible expectations. And every time she walked into the quiet condo she'd bought after leaving me, there was no one waiting to ask how her day had gone. No warm meal, no laughter, no familiar voice saying, "You did great today." She'd gotten everything she thought she wanted. Yet, somehow, it had never felt emptier. She still believed divorcing me had been the right decision. But for the first time, she wasn't quite as certain as she used to be. And neither of us knew that a forgotten envelope, hidden in a hospital archive, was about to reveal the truth that would shatter everything she believed about the night our marriage ended. 5 years passed. If someone had told me the pain would eventually stop, I wouldn't have believed them. It didn't stop. It simply changed. Instead of waking up every morning wondering why my marriage had ended, I woke up thinking about the families waiting to move into the homes my team was building. Our nonprofit had grown beyond anything I imagined. We partnered with cities across Illinois, helping veterans, teachers, firefighters, and working families buy homes they could actually afford. The work wasn't glamorous. It didn't make magazine covers. But every time I handed a family the keys to their first home, I felt richer than I'd ever felt with a bigger paycheck. Dad recovered enough to attend our ribbon-cutting ceremonies. He still walked with a cane, but he never missed a chance to tell strangers how proud he was. Emma got married and named me the godfather of her daughter. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. The kind of peace I used to think only existed in movies. I hadn't seen Claire in years. Not once. Until one cold November afternoon. Our nonprofit was being honored at a civic awards luncheon downtown. As I stepped out of the elevator, I froze. Standing across the lobby, talking with a group of executives, was Claire. She looked different. Still beautiful. But the confidence she used to wear like armor had faded. There were faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. When she saw me, she stopped speaking mid-sentence. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then she quietly excused herself and walked toward me. "Ethan." Her voice was almost a whisper. "It's been a long time. It has. You look happy. I am. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm glad. There was an awkward silence. Finally, she asked, "How's your dad?" I blinked. You remember? Of course I remember. He's doing well. I'm happy to hear that. Another silence. Then someone called her name. She nodded politely. I should go. Take care, Claire. You too. She walked away. But before disappearing into the ballroom, she looked back. Just once. There was something in her expression I'd never seen before. Regret. A month later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Hello. Ethan. I recognized the voice immediately. Linda. Claire's mother. The woman who once called my father's medical emergency an excuse. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I said nothing. I owe you an apology. I almost laughed. After 5 years? What happened? She took a shaky breath. Claire's father passed away last week. My heart sank. Robert had always treated me with kindness, even when everyone else turned against me. I'm sorry. He left something, and I think it belongs to you as much as Claire. 2 days later, I attended Robert's memorial service. Not because I expected anything, because he deserved my respect. The church was filled with old friends. Some recognized me. Some looked embarrassed. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Claire sat in the front pew beside her mother. She looked exhausted. After the service, Linda approached me. Without saying a word, she handed me a sealed envelope. Robert asked me to give this to both of you. My name and Claire's were written together on the front, for the first time in years. We opened it in a quiet room behind the chapel. Inside was a handwritten letter. Robert's handwriting was shaky. If you're both reading this, it means I'm gone. There has been something I kept to myself because I believed it wasn't my place. Now I know my silence became my greatest mistake. Claire looked confused. She continued reading. The night of Claire's promotion, I collapsed at home before Ethan ever arrived at the hospital. The paramedics told me later that Ethan reached the emergency room just as they were taking me into surgery. He refused to leave my side because the doctors believed I might not survive. I heard everything after I woke up. I heard Ethan begging to borrow a phone. I heard nurses trying to help him. I heard him crying because Claire wouldn't answer once his phone died. Claire's hands began shaking. Tears rolled onto the paper. Robert continued. Ethan begged me not to tell Claire after the divorce. He said, if she comes back because she feels guilty, she'll never know whether she came back out of love. That was the moment I realized what kind of man my son-in-law truly was. Claire covered her mouth. She looked at me with complete disbelief. I quietly lowered my eyes. There was more. Claire, I loved you enough to support your choices. But I also watched pride make decisions that love should have made. You judged your husband before hearing his truth. Ethan, if you're reading this, thank you for choosing my life over your own happiness. I never found the courage to tell you how much that sacrifice meant to me. The room was silent, except for Claire crying. Not politely, not quietly, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep inside. She looked at me. Is this true? I nodded. You asked him not to tell me? Yes. Why? Because I didn't want you trapped in a marriage built on guilt. She stared at me as though she didn't recognize the man she'd once been married to. I destroyed us. I didn't answer, because there wasn't anything left to say. 3 weeks later, Claire asked if we could meet. After thinking about it for days, I agreed, not to reopen old wounds, but to finally close them. We met at the same lakeside park where I'd proposed to her 12 years earlier. Winter had stripped the trees bare. The wind carried the smell of snow. Claire looked nervous. She wasn't dressed like an executive. Just jeans. A gray sweater. No makeup. She looked more like the woman I'd fallen in love with than the one who had walked away. She sat beside me on the bench for several minutes. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, I replayed that night every day since I read Dad's letter. She looked down at her hands. I thought you abandoned me. I know. I never asked why. No. I was so sure I was right that I didn't even leave room for the possibility that I was wrong. Her voice cracked. I punished the only person who had never stopped choosing me. I looked across the frozen lake. The hardest part wasn't the divorce. She looked up. It was realizing that the woman I loved had stopped believing the best about me. Claire broke down again. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I know you are. I would give anything to undo it. I finally turned toward her. You can't. I know. I've spent years wishing I could. She nodded, tears falling freely. Then she asked the question she had carried for 5 long years. Is there any chance? I closed my eyes, because this was the moment I'd imagined hundreds of times. And yet, the answer wasn't what either of us expected. Claire's question hung in the cold winter air. Is there any chance? For a long moment, I couldn't answer. 5 years earlier, I would have done anything to hear those words. I would have crossed every state in America barefoot if it meant getting my wife back. But life has a strange way of changing what your heart wants. I looked at the woman I had once imagined growing old with. The woman who had celebrated every birthday with me. The woman who had held my hand when we buried my mother. The woman who had once been my entire world. And for the first time, she wasn't my future. She was my past. I took a slow breath. Claire. She searched my face desperately. I forgive you. She closed her eyes as tears streamed down her cheeks. You do. I forgave you a long time ago. She covered her mouth, unable to speak. But forgiveness isn't the same as going back. The hope in her eyes slowly faded. I still care about you, I continued. I probably always will. You were my wife for 12 years. That doesn't just disappear. She nodded silently. But the man you divorced doesn't exist anymore. The wind swept across the frozen lake. I spent years trying to rebuild what your decision destroyed. I smiled sadly. And somewhere along the way, I rebuilt myself instead. Claire lowered her head. I know. No, I said gently. I don't think you do. She looked up. I learned something after our divorce. What? Love isn't just believing someone when everything is easy. I paused. It's believing them when it's hardest. She started crying again. I failed you. We both failed each other in different ways. No, she whispered. You showed up for my father. You stood by him. You stood by me. I was the one who walked away. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, I stood. I should go. She reached for my hand instinctively. I let her hold it for one brief second. Then I gently slipped away. Goodbye, Claire. Her voice broke. Goodbye, Ethan. 6 months later, spring arrived with warm sunshine and fresh beginnings. Our nonprofit completed its largest housing project yet. Nearly 100 families received keys to homes they never thought they'd own. Dad stood beside me during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. This is your best work yet, he said proudly. No. I smiled. It's ours. He squeezed my shoulder. I always knew you'd build something that mattered. As reporters interviewed our team, someone called my name. I turned around. Claire stood quietly near the back of the crowd. She wasn't there as an executive. She wasn't representing her company. She was simply watching. When our eyes met, she smiled. A small, gentle, respectful smile. I walked over. I didn't know you were coming. I almost didn't. What changed? She looked toward the families, laughing outside their new homes. I wanted to see the life you built. There wasn't bitterness in her voice. Only admiration. You were always meant to do this. I chuckled. It took me a while to figure that out. She nodded. It took me longer. Before leaving, she reached into her purse. I brought something. It was an old photograph. Our first apartment. The two of us sitting on the floor eating frozen pizza. I laughed. I forgot this picture existed. I found it while cleaning. She hesitated. I almost threw it away, but I couldn't. I studied the picture. We looked so young, so hopeful, so certain that love alone could solve everything. I think you should keep it, I said. She looked surprised. Really, it belongs to part of your life. And yours. My memories don't need photographs anymore. She understood exactly what I meant. She folded the picture carefully and slipped it back into her purse. Thank you. Then she left. 2 years later, life continued moving forward. Dad celebrated his 75th birthday surrounded by family. Emma's little daughter ran through the backyard chasing bubbles. The neighborhood we'd rebuilt was thriving. Children played safely in streets that had once been abandoned. Sometimes I drove through there just to remind myself that broken things really could be rebuilt, just not always in the way we expected. One afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a leadership conference about community development. As I stepped onto the stage, I noticed someone sitting quietly in the last row. Claire. She stayed for the entire presentation. She didn't approach me afterward. She simply applauded with everyone else and quietly walked away. That was the last time I ever saw her. What happened to Claire? Years later, I heard bits and pieces from mutual friends. She left the corporate world. The promotions she had chased no longer meant much to her. Instead, she began working with organizations that helped young professionals balance ambition with family. She often spoke about the cost of making permanent decisions during temporary moments of anger. But she never shared our names. She never blamed me. She blamed herself. She never remarried. Some people assumed it was because she never met the right man. I wasn't so sure. 10 years after the divorce, one rainy afternoon, a handwritten letter arrived at my office. There was no return address. Inside was a single page. Ethan, I don't expect a reply. I only wanted you to know something. For years, I thought my greatest regret was divorcing you. I was wrong. My greatest regret was deciding who you were without allowing you to explain. I confused disappointment with truth. I confused pride with strength. And by the time I realized the difference, you had already become the man I should have stood beside. I hope your life continues to be filled with peace. Thank you for loving me the way you did. I finally understand how rare that was. Claire. I folded the letter carefully. Then I opened my desk drawer. Inside were my mother's watch, Dad's old hospital bracelet, and the key to our first apartment. I placed Claire's letter beside them, not because I wanted to hold on to the past, but because the past had shaped the man I became. As I looked out my office window, children were playing in a neighborhood that hadn't existed 10 years earlier. Families laughed on front porches. Neighbors talked across fences. Homes stood where abandoned lots once collected weeds. I realized something then. Claire had spent years mourning the marriage she lost. I had spent those same years building a life I never would have found if everything had gone according to my plans. Sometimes the greatest tragedy isn't losing someone you love. It's losing them because you stopped believing in their character before you knew their truth. And sometimes the deepest regret doesn't come from a single mistake. It comes from realizing, far too late, that the person you walked away from was the safest place you would ever call home. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Do you think Claire deserved a second chance, or did Ethan make the right decision by moving on? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy powerful stories of love, betrayal, regret, and second chances, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next unforgettable story.